When the HOA president blocked his ranch and locked the gate, most people thought Anthony Ridley would give up. But he didn't. Instead, he made a move no one expected. Anthony had seen storms break fences before, but this one was different. It wasn't made of wood or wire. It was made of rules, pride, and a padlock that did not belong to him. One morning in early March, just as the sun rose over the fields outside Abilene, Anthony walked out with a cup of coffee and stopped in shock. A brand new fence ran across his property line. It was shiny, tall, and not his. Worse, it wasn't even on his land. In the middle of it stood a steel gate with a heavy lock. A sign on the gate read, "Property access managed by the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association." Anthony put his coffee on the porch rail and stared. His cattle were still inside the ranch, but now they were trapped like zoo animals. The old access road that led to the highway was now behind that locked gate. The only person with a key was the HOA president, Marjorie Kane. Marjorie was known for sharp suits, sharp heels, and an even sharper attitude. Anthony had only lived here 6 weeks. He left the noisy city of Amarillo to live a quiet ranch life at age 46. His hands were rough from years of ranch work, and his back still hurt from the last cattle season. He worked hard and saved for years to buy this land. He dreamed of quiet mornings and the sound of cattle, not rules and fines. He never expected a homeowners association to fence him in. When he reached the gate, 2 men in HOA shirts were tightening bolts. "Morning," Anthony said, trying to stay calm. "Mind telling me what this is?" One worker didn't respond. The other said, "Talk to the board." Then Anthony saw her, Marjorie Kane, pulling up in a shining silver SUV. She stepped out, wearing sunglasses and holding a clipboard. "Mr. Ridley," she said coldly, "you have been warned about your violation." Anthony frowned. "Violation of what?" "Your fence," she said. "It does not match community rules. Until it is fixed, this gate will stay locked to stop more violations." Anthony pointed at the cattle near the fence. "That road is my way out. My animals need water from the creek. And that land isn't yours, Marjorie." Her smile was thin. "The access road is controlled by the HOA. You agreed to the rules when you bought the property." Anthony felt his stomach twist. He remembered the long stack of legal papers he signed at closing, full of words only lawyers understand. "You mean you can lock me in until I obey?" he asked. "Yes," she said, turning away. "Call our office when you are ready to install the approved fence." "Have a nice day." The gate slammed shut. She drove away. The workers left without a word. Anthony stood there for a long time with his hands on his hips. The wind blew at his shirt. He had handled drought, stubborn cattle, and high feed costs. But he had never dealt with someone so ready to prove a point. That night, he sat at the table with his neighbor, Glenn Porter, a retired trucker who had lived here for 20 years. "They've done this before," Glenn said. "Marjorie controls the whole board. If she doesn't like you, she makes your life hell." Anthony shook his head. "I didn't move out here to be pushed around by a committee." "Then get ready for a fight," Glenn warned. "She won't give you that key unless you play by her rules." Anthony leaned back and stared at the ceiling. He didn't know how far this would go, but he knew one thing: he was not giving up. This land was not just dirt. It was his dream, his work, and his future. The next morning, he drove to town, bought a folder, and started gathering every paper, letter, and photo connected to the property. If Marjorie wanted a fight, she was going to get one. But he had no idea how big, how personal, and how public that fight was about to become. 2 days later, Anthony walked into the Lakeside Meadows clubhouse for his first official HOA meeting. The room smelled like old carpet and fresh coffee. Every seat was filled. 6 board members sat behind a long table, papers stacked in front of them, and in the center sat Marjorie Kane, wearing a navy blazer and a necklace that probably cost more than Anthony's first truck. At the meeting, Marjorie Kane sat in the center of the board table. Her eyes followed Anthony as he took a seat in the back. "Mr. Ridley," she said into the microphone before the meeting even began, "you will be discussed under compliance matters." The first 40 minutes were filled with boring topics: landscaping rules, pool hours, and an argument about someone's mailbox color. Anthony barely listened. He kept reading the packet they gave him. It was full of rules about paint colors, driveway length, and even what kind of lawn decorations were allowed. When his name was finally called, he walked to the front. His boots echoed loudly in the quiet room. "Let's talk about your fence," Marjorie began. Anthony took a deep breath. "It's the same fence I used for years at my old ranch. It's strong, safe, and it keeps my cattle inside. Functional is not the standard here," she replied. "Our community requires matching fences. Yours does not meet the approved style." Anthony opened his folder and spread out papers. "This is a cattle ranch, not a golf course. My fence is made to protect livestock, not to look pretty from the road." A man at the end of the table cleared his throat. "Rules are rules, sir. If we make an exception for you, we'd have to do it for everyone." Anthony looked straight at him. "But you already make exceptions. I passed 3 houses today with different fence styles. None of them match yours, and none of them are locked behind a gate." People in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Marjorie's lips tightened. "Those cases are under review," she said quickly. "But you are still out of compliance. The fines will continue until you fix the fence." Anthony leaned forward. "What about the fact that your locked fence blocks my access to water?" "I can't take care of my animals. That's not just unfair. It's dangerous. You have other water sources," she replied. "We confirmed it with satellite images." Anthony let out a humorless laugh. "Satellite images? You think a picture from space can tell you how I run my ranch?" A low murmur moved through the room. Glenn Porter raised his hand. "Marjorie, the man's been here only 2 months. Maybe give him time to adjust before locking his gate and fining him." Marjorie didn't even look at Glenn. "If Mr. Ridley wants to be part of this community, he must follow the rules like everyone else." Anthony picked up his folder. "And if I don't?" Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Then we continue with fines. And if needed, legal action." Anthony said nothing and walked back to his seat. But inside he was burning with anger. After the meeting, a few neighbors quietly offered support, but they spoke fast and nervously, like they were afraid she might hear. Others avoided him completely. It was clear Marjorie had power here, and not just as HOA president. Outside in the parking lot, Glenn caught up to him. "She's not just strict," Glenn said quietly. "She has friends on the county zoning board and a cousin in real estate. People think twice before fighting her." Anthony looked back through the glass doors. Marjorie was inside, shaking hands with a tall man in a suit. Both of them smiled like they had already won. "I'm not playing her game," Anthony said. "If she wants a battle, I'll bring one she's not ready for." But he didn't yet understand how far Marjorie was willing to go, or how heavy the cost would be for both of them. By the next week, Anthony's mailbox was filled with HOA letters. Every day brought a new envelope stamped Hunter Compliance Office. The fines began at $50 a day, then jumped to $100. The letters said his fence caused a visual inconsistency harmful to community appearance. Anthony read the words out loud in his kitchen. "Visual inconsistency? I'm raising cattle, not hosting weddings." Glenn sat across from him drinking coffee. "They know what they're doing. They keep adding fines, so you'll either give up or go broke." That evening, Anthony decided to attend the next HOA meeting, not to argue, but to watch and learn. He wanted to understand how they worked so he could find their weak spots. The clubhouse was full again, but this time the room felt tense. A woman named Paula Green was at the front, upset because the HOA forced her to cut down a tree. She glanced at Anthony while speaking, then quickly looked away. When the meeting moved to new compliance matters, Marjorie glanced at Anthony during the meeting, but she didn't call his name. Instead, she listed other violations: an RV parked too long, a shed painted the wrong color, and a porch light that was too bright. Anthony watched closely. Her tone was always the same, cold, strict, and backed by the threat of punishment. Later in the parking lot, Paula Green walked up to him. "You're Ridley, right? The rancher with the fence problem?" "That's me," Anthony said. "They're going to wear you down until you give up or move out," she warned. "Marjorie has been doing this for years. She doesn't care who you are. She only cares about winning." Anthony studied her face. "Then why do people let her keep winning?" Paula's voice dropped. "Because most people don't want trouble, and Marjorie knows how to make trouble expensive." Her words stayed in his mind. He realized the HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, it was creating fear. And now, by refusing to obey, he had become the one person willing to stand up. The next day, Anthony called the HOA office. "I'm requesting mediation," he said. "I want to sit down with the board and work out a solution." On the day of mediation, he arrived with photos of his cattle, maps of the land, and notes from every conversation so far. Marjorie sat across from him, flipping slowly through a thin binder like the decision was already made. "Mr. Ridley," the mediator began, "the HOA is willing to remove some of the fines if you agree to replace your fence in the next 60 days. Anthony shook his head. "That's not a compromise. That's just your demand with a smaller price tag." "We are being generous," Marjorie said. "Most people don't get this offer." Anthony leaned forward. "Most people don't have their animals trapped behind a locked gate either. This isn't just about fencing. This is my work, my income, and my responsibility." The mediator looked uncomfortable. "Let's focus on solutions." "The solution," Anthony interrupted, "is you unlock the road and stop pretending you're doing me a favor." Marjorie stood. "We'll be in touch." The mediation ended with nothing solved. That night, Anthony sat on his porch long after dark, listening to the low calls of his cattle. The line between him and the HOA was now clear, and both sides refused to cross it. But soon, the fight would leave quiet meetings and become something far more public and far more dangerous. The breaking point came on a windy Thursday morning. Anthony had been up since sunrise, fixing a water pump near the north pasture. When he walked toward the creek, he noticed his cattle gathered near the new fence, pacing and restless. He looked closer and felt anger rise in his chest. The new fence didn't just block the road anymore. It now cut off the only main water source on that side of the ranch. The creek was completely unreachable. He dropped his gloves and climbed the fence, landing hard on the other side. The locked gate stood in front of him like a challenge, the steel lock shining in the sun. He pulled on it. Nothing moved, no answer, no access. By mid-morning, he was on the phone with the HOA again. "My cattle need water," he said firmly. "You can't block the creek. This is basic animal care." The woman on the phone responded in a flat voice. "Mr. Ridley, the HOA confirmed there are other water points on the property. Those tanks are backup," he snapped. "If we get a heat wave, they'll be empty in days. Do you want to be responsible for dead cattle?" "I can forward your concern to the board," she said, clearly uninterested, "but I cannot approve access." That afternoon, Anthony drove straight to Marjorie's house. Her home was perfect. Fresh paint, trimmed bushes, not one thing out of place. She opened the door wearing a neat light blue blouse, calm and emotionless. "This isn't about fines anymore," Anthony said, forcing himself to stay calm. "It's about my animals. You're cutting them off from water." Marjorie's answer sounded practiced. "The HOA must follow one standard. If we make exceptions, we lose control of the community." Anthony's voice rose. "You're talking about fence style." "I'm talking about living animals that depend on me to keep them alive." Her expression didn't change. "The rules are the rules." Anthony stepped back, fists tight at his sides. To stop himself from saying something he would regret, Anthony turned away. "This isn't over." "Marjorie," he said as he walked off. He noticed movement behind her. Curtains. Neighbors were watching. Now the fight was no longer just between him and the HOA president. It had become a public show. 2 days later, the first signs of stress showed in his cattle. Some of the cows stood near the fence and cried toward the creek. Anthony brought in extra water tanks, but hauling and refilling them was tiring and costly. Glenn came over one afternoon to help. He leaned against the truck as they unloaded another tank. "She's playing hardball," Glenn said. "She wants to wear you down until you give up. She's not getting what she wants," Anthony replied, pulling a wrench from the toolbox. "I'll keep hauling water if I have to, but I'm not rebuilding that fence just to fit her idea of beauty." Still, the pressure grew. By the end of the week, Anthony was barely sleeping. He worked on the ranch while also dealing with constant letters and notices from the drawer. One envelope even had a photo taken from the road. It showed one of his water tanks leaning a little to the side. The letter called it a safety hazard and demanded he remove. "That's harassment," Glenn said after reading it. "That's Marjorie," Anthony replied. Then one morning, everything changed. A for sale sign suddenly appeared on the small half-acre lot that held the locked gate. The land was not part of his ranch or the HOA's property. Anthony stared at the sign, and his mind started working fast. If he bought that land, he would own the gate. And if he owned the gate, the lock would be his. But he knew if Marjorie found out, she would find a way to stop the sale. So he had to move fast and stay quiet. Anthony didn't run straight to the real estate office. He wanted to understand everything first. That afternoon, He drove into Abilene and met with Tom Beard, a local lawyer. Tom's office smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. His strong handshake showed he had been doing this work for many years. Anthony placed the letters, photos, and HOA notices on Tom's desk. "I want to know if what they're doing is legal," he said. "And if I buy the land with that gate on it, do I control it completely?" Tom adjusted his glasses and read through the papers. "They're working inside the rules you agreed to when you bought the property," he said slowly. "That's the bad news. Those rules were part of your purchase agreement, and they give the HOA more power than most people realize." "And the good news?" Anthony asked. Tom tapped the photo of the for sale sign. "If that land really is separate from the HOA, and it has the only gate to your property, then yes, you would have full legal control. But you must confirm that first, and you must buy it in a way that doesn't alert the HOA. Anthony nodded. "Meaning Marjorie can't know it's me?" "Exactly," Tom said. "If she finds out, she could push the seller to take another offer or change the zoning before the sale goes through. You must keep your name out of it." For the next few days, Anthony acted normal. He fed the cattle, hauled water, and waved at neighbors. But at night, he sat at his kitchen table making a plan. He called an old college friend, Brett Lawson, who owned a property management company in another county. Brett agreed to create an LLC under his company, so Anthony could stay completely hidden in the deal. One evening, Glenn stopped by and saw Anthony studying a county map. "You're cooking something up," Glenn said with a grin. Anthony didn't deny it. "If I tell you, you have to promise it stays between us." Glenn raised his hand. "My lips are sealed," Anthony explained the plan quietly. When he finished, Glenn grinned even wider. "That's bold," he said, "and I like it." Meanwhile, Marjorie seemed to feel something was changing. She started showing up near the fence more often, sometimes with 2 other HOA board members. They stood by the gate, talking quietly and looking toward Anthony's land. One afternoon, while he was fixing a fence post, she walked over with her clipboard. "Mr. Ridley," she said, "we've scheduled another compliance inspection for next week." Anthony didn't look up. "You can schedule all you want. My fence isn't changing." "You're only making things harder for yourself," she said. He stood up and looked her in the eyes. "And you're underestimating me." They stared at each other for a moment before Marjorie turned and walked back to her SUV. The next morning, Anthony's phone buzzed. It was Brett. The seller accepted the offer from the LLC, he said. No counteroffer. No questions asked. The closing date was set for just under 3 weeks. It felt like Anthony's first real win in months. But Tom warned him. "The deal isn't final until the ink is dry. Don't act like you've already won. Don't let your opponent know you're holding the winning hand." Anthony agreed. He knew Marjorie wouldn't stop until she believed she had total control. The trick was to let her think that, until the moment she didn't. But in a small town, keeping a secret was like trying to hold water in your hands. Anthony was about to learn how fast news could spread. 2 days after Brett's call, Anthony drove past the lot with the gate. He wanted to make sure the for sale sign was still there. It was. A gust of wind had bent one corner of the sign, but nothing else had changed. He parked down the road and watched for a while. The land was small, just big enough for the gate, a gravel strip, and a thin line of mesquite trees in the back, but it controlled everything beyond it. Whoever owned this land controlled every truck, every delivery, and every person entering his ranch. Anthony knew the HOA would have bought it already if they had the money or the legal right. The fact that they hadn't meant there was a gap he could quietly slip through. That afternoon, Brett called again. Title search came back clean. No lines, no disputes. The seller just wants to unload it fast. He probably doesn't even know how much power this land gives. Anthony smiled. Good, let's keep it that way. The next week, Anthony stayed calm and quiet. No extra trips to town. No unusual conversations with neighbors. When people asked about the fence fight, he just shrugged and said, "We'll see how it plays out." But in his mind, he was already imagining sliding his own key into that padlock and turning it. One evening, Glenn came over with a cooler of beer and leaned on the porch railing. "You've been awfully quiet lately," he said. "That's either good news, or you're planning something dangerous." Anthony handed him a beer. Let's just say I'm lining things up so I don't have to ask for permission anymore. Glenn grinned. Now that sounds like the Anthony I know. The hardest part was staying calm when he saw Marjorie. She drove past. Twice that week while Anthony was working near the road, she gave him her usual short wave, more like a gesture than a greeting. He kept his face blank, but inside, he could feel the pressure building. Meanwhile, inside the HOA office, things were changing. Paula Green, the neighbor who had warned him before, stopped him in the grocery store. I heard the board is asking questions about that gate lot, she whispered. Don't know what they're planning, but they're talking to a surveyor. Anthony kept his voice steady. Thanks for the warning. That night he called Brett. We need to move faster. If they bring in surveyors, they could delay the sale or drag it into court. I'll push the title company, Brett said. We can get escrow open by Friday. The days in between felt like a slow boil. Anthony worked his normal chores. But every sound of tires on gravel made him look toward the road. He kept imagining Marjorie showing up at the last second and taking everything away. On Friday morning, Brett called again. It's done, he said. Escrow is open. Deposit is in. We're locked in unless you back out. And I know you're not backing out. Anthony let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Let's close it as fast as possible, he said. He didn't celebrate that night. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with a pen, making a list of every possible problem that could happen next. Because once he owned the gate, Marjorie would strike back, hard. She might call the sheriff, file lawsuits, or push the board to write new rules. But none of that would matter if the land was legally his. Still, a quiet victory wouldn't mean much if the HOA found another way to trap him. He had to be ready, not just for the fight, but for what came after. But even with all his planning, Anthony had no idea how fast the tension would rise once the sale became public, or how quickly the whole community would start choosing sides. The closing date arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. The sky looked heavy but didn't rain. Anthony dressed like it was any other day, jeans, boots covered in dust, and a plain shirt. He drove into Abilene without telling anyone. He parked behind the title company's small brick building. Brett was already inside, drinking coffee and flipping through the papers. Morning, Brett said with a grin. Ready to make Marjorie's life a whole lot more complicated? Brett asked. Anthony smirked. Let's get it done. The process was simple. Because the LLC was listed as the buyer, Anthony's name never appeared on the official papers. Brett signed on behalf of the company, slid the documents across the desk, and within an hour, the deal was complete. The keys, a single heavy silver set on a worn leather keychain, sat in the middle of the table. Brett pushed them toward him. They're yours. Anthony picked them up and turned the biggest key in his hand. He could feel the weight of it. It wasn't just metal. It was power. For months, Marjorie had controlled when and how he could reach his own land. Now, with one turn of this key, all that power shifted. They left through the back door. Careful not to draw attention, Brett clapped him on the shoulder. Congrats. You just bought yourself a gate and a fight. Back at the ranch, Anthony parked by the road and walked the last 50 yards to the lot. The gate looked the same as always, but it felt different now. It wasn't a barrier anymore. It was his. He slid the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly, and the shackle popped open. The sound was sharp, final, like a door closing behind him. He swung the gate wide and stepped back, letting the cattle wander toward the creek. For the first time in weeks, he felt control returning. That feeling lasted exactly 2 days. On the third morning, a white SUV pulled up and stopped in front of the gate. Marjorie stepped out, heels clicking on the gravel. Clipboard in hand, 2 other board members followed her. Mr. Ridley, she said, voice cold. You appear to have accessed HOA property without authorization. Anthony leaned on the gate. This isn't HOA property anymore. I own this lot. You can check the county records. Her eyes narrowed. That's impossible. The association had first right of refusal. Maybe they did, Anthony said calmly, but they didn't use it. The seller accepted my offer. Now this gate is mine, and I have the paperwork to prove it. One board member shifted nervously. Marjorie. If that's true, she cut him off. We'll see about that. She turned back to Anthony. Don't think for a second this is over. We will challenge it. Anthony didn't move. Challenge whatever you want. But you don't control this access anymore. I do. They left without another word, but the tension was heavy in the air. By that afternoon, Anthony had received 3 emails from the HOA demanding urgent clarification of the gate's status. He forwarded them to Tom, who replied with one sentence. Let them make the next move. Over the next week. Word spread fast. Neighbors he barely knew stopped him at the feed store or waved him down on the road. Some quietly congratulated him, like they didn't want anyone else to hear. Others warned him that the board was looking for a way to make an example out of him. Glenn stopped by one evening and found Anthony on the porch. Boots up, drinking coffee? Looks like you lit a fire. Glenn said. Anthony nodded. Good, maybe. It's time people stopped being afraid of Marjorie, but Anthony didn't know that taking control of the gate was only around one. The real fight was coming, and soon the entire neighborhood would be forced to choose sides. It didn't take long for the HOA to strike back. 2 days after Marjorie's visit, Anthony received a certified letter. It claimed his ownership of the lot might interfere with association rights, and ordered him to stop all changes until a legal review was complete. That evening, he walked the letter over to Glenn's house. Glenn read it, then laughed. They're bluffing. If they had a real case, they'd already be in court. Bluff or not, Anthony said. They're not backing down. Tension hit a new level that Saturday. Anthony was hauling feet into the ranch when he saw Marjorie standing at the gate with 2 sheriff's deputies there. Trucks sat behind her, sunlight reflecting off the gold decals. Anthony slowed, rolled down the window. One deputy stepped forward. Mr. Ridley, we got a call about a property dispute. We're here to keep the peace. Anthony climbed out holding his paperwork. Deputies, this is my land. This lot, this gate, it's all on the deed. I bought it fair and square. Marjorie crossed her arms and said, that property has always been under HOA control. He's blocking the community from using it. Anthony stayed calm and handed one of the deputies a copy of the recorded deed. The deputy looked at it, nodded and said, it's correct. He owns the land. Marjorie's jaw tightened. We'll take this to court, she said. The deputy replied, that's your right. Ma'am, but for now there is no law being broken. Marjorie and her group left, but a small crowd of neighbors had already gathered to watch. Anthony could hear people whispering. Some supported him, while others stood with Marjorie. The neighborhood was clearly divided now. That night, Anthony's phone buzzed with a text from Paula Green. It said, be careful. They're holding an emergency board meeting on Monday. I heard they're planning new rules that could hurt you. Monday arrived and Anthony went to the meeting early. The room was full and the tension felt heavy. Marjorie started speaking right away. As many of you know, she said, recent events have shown that we need stronger control to protect community standards. She then announced a new amendment that would give the HOA full authority over any access point used by more than one property. Anthony raised his hand. That's a very convenient rule, he said, especially since it targets one person, me. Marjorie answered, this is not about you, Mr. Ridley. It's about the community. But she never took her eyes off him. The argument went back and forth. Anthony explained that the amendment would allow the HOA to control land they did not own. Marjorie replied with vague statements about safety and order. When it was time to vote, the board split. 3 voted yes, 2 voted no. But the rule still needed approval from most homeowners before it could pass. After the meeting, several neighbors walked up to Anthony. One of them, a thin man named Frank Delgado, leaned in and said quietly, you're not the first person she's tried to push around, but you might be the first one who can beat her. Keep going. By the middle of the week, the fight moved on to social media. A local community page exploded with posts about the gate, the HOA, and whether Marjorie had gone too far. Anthony posted only facts and copies of public records, but the comment section showed the real truth. Neighbors were choosing sides like it was a town election. Then something unexpected happened. Glenn showed up one evening holding a plain envelope. Inside was a note with no name on it. It said, check the county clerk's filings tomorrow. The next morning, Anthony did exactly that. What he found made his stomach drop. Marjorie had filed paperwork to buy a strip of land right next to his fence. If she got it, she could make a new road and take away half of his power in the fight. But Anthony was not scared. If Marjorie thought this would make him give up, she was wrong. He had come too far to back down now. The next day, Anthony went straight to the office of his lawyer, Tom Baird. Tom was sitting back in his chair when Anthony walked in and dropped the papers on his desk. "She's trying to trap me again," Anthony said. "If she buys that land, she can bypass my gate completely." Tom looked at the filing and nodded. "It's a smart plan, but it's not over. The land is still owned by the county, and it may be needed for utilities. She'll have to go through a long process to get it. We can slow her down. We can file an objection, request a review, maybe even convince the county to keep the land public." Anthony said, "Do it. I'll pay whatever it costs." Tom got to work right away, but outside the legal fight, things were getting bigger. A local newspaper ran a front-page story titled, "Rancher Battles HOA Over Locked Gate." The article was neutral, but the photo of Anthony standing at the gate with his arms crossed made him look like a man protecting his land. The next morning at the feed store, strangers walked up to shake his hand. "Saw you in the paper," an older man said. About time someone stood up to them, but not everyone supported him. At the grocery store, a woman wearing an HOA volunteer badge walked past and muttered, "You're making things harder for all of us." Anthony didn't respond. By the end of the week, a local radio show picked up the story. Callers argued for almost an hour. Some supported Anthony's property rights, and others believed the HOA needed control to keep order. Anthony sat in his truck and listened, surprised by how fast his private fight had become a public issue. Then came the community barbecue, an annual event held at the town park. Normally, it was a friendly gathering where neighbors relaxed, ate food, and talked. But this year, everything felt different. At the community barbecue, people usually relaxed and ate smoked brisket and drank sweet tea. But this year, it felt more like a political rally. Groups of neighbors stood under the shade trees, talking in small circles. Some people were even wearing pins that said "Ridley's Right," which Glenn had started handing out. Anthony stayed near the edge with a plate of food, but he knew he couldn't avoid Marjorie forever. She walked toward him with two board members beside her, wearing a stiff smile. "Mr. Ridley," she said, "enjoying the event?" Anthony replied calmly, "Not as much as I'd enjoy getting my time back instead of dealing with all this." Her smile did not move. "You've made your point," she said, "but the HOA will continue to enforce its rules. You should think about the long-term consequences of all this attention." Anthony looked straight at her and said, "You've used fear to control people for years. That ends now." People nearby stopped talking and began watching. Marjorie noticed and quickly changed her tone, pretending to sound friendly. "We can still work this out without going to court," she said. Anthony shook his head. "You had that chance months ago. You chose to lock the gate instead." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement. That night, Paula called him and said, "You know she's furious, right? She's lost control of the story. People aren't scared to speak anymore." Anthony leaned back in his chair. Good, maybe that's the real win here. But he also knew Marjorie was not finished. Someone like her would not walk away without trying something big. 2 days later, Tom called him with news. Marjorie had filed a lawsuit claiming there were problems in how he bought the land with the gate. But instead of feeling scared, Anthony felt stronger. Now it wasn't just about his own property. He was fighting for every neighbor who had been pushed around by the HOA and never fought back. The official lawsuit arrived on a Friday afternoon. A deputy handed him a thick packet of legal papers and said, "Guess you knew this was coming." Anthony nodded. "Yeah, I was expecting it." The documents were full of legal terms about easements and property rights, but Anthony could see the truth beneath the wording. It was Marjorie's last attempt to take back control. Tom met with him the next morning. "They don't have anything real," he said, flipping through the pages. "Your sale was legal. The title is clean. They're just hoping you'll get tired and give in." Anthony shook his head. "I'm not settling." Over the next few weeks, the case moved through the county court. Each hearing brought people from town, some curious, some supporting Anthony, and a few strict HOA loyalists who sat in the back with crossed arms. Marjorie always arrived early, dressed perfectly, with board members beside her, and she never looked at Anthony once. During a break, Paula came up to him and said, "Win or lose, you've already changed things. People are asking questions now. They're not afraid anymore." Anthony thanked her, but he wasn't looking for a symbolic win. He wanted a real one. That win finally came on a bright Tuesday morning in early summer. The judge ruled that the land purchase was valid, the title was legal, and the HOA had no authority over the gate or the lot. The HOA was also ordered to pay Anthony's legal costs. When the judge hit the gavel, the courtroom filled with quiet excitement. Glenn grinned and gave Anthony a thumbs up. Paula smiled proudly. Even a few people who had stayed silent came forward to shake his hand. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras. Anthony gave a short statement. This was never about offense. It was about the principle that you don't let someone take what's yours just because they think they can. I hope this encourages others to stand their ground. Later, Anthony drove back to the ranch and walked to the gate. The cattle were eating near the creek, the water shining in the sun. He leaned against the post and felt the wind on his face. For the first time in months, he felt free. No weight on his shoulders. No gate blocking his land. Glenn arrived with 2 cold beers. "Feels good, doesn't it?" he said. Anthony smiled. "It's more than that. It's knowing that if you stand up once, maybe it gives others the courage to stand up too." They sat together in the shade, talking about the cattle, the weather, and the future. Anthony knew the HOA would not disappear, and Marjorie might still cause problems in smaller ways, but she had learned that fear had limits, and he had learned that patience and truth could win. Weeks later, Anthony noticed something small but important. The tone of HOA meetings had changed. Board members spoke more carefully. Neighbors asked questions without fear. The silence that had controlled the community for years had finally broken, and that, Anthony thought, was the real victory, if there was one lesson in all of it. It was simple. The moment you stop letting someone else write the rules for your life, you start living on your own terms. So, if you're listening to this and you have your own locked gate, whatever it may be, don't assume you just have to accept it. Ask questions, push back, and if the fight is worth it, don't stop until you turn that lock with your own key. Subscribe for more real stories that remind you that your voice matters, your rights matter, and no one can fence in your life unless you let them.